The panel is on blue carbon and mangrove ecosystem. The moment we use the term blue carbon, we get into the realm of mitigation. If we look at the nearest mangrove ecosystem here, which is of course the Sundarbans that you've visited so many times, is a very efficient sequester of carbon. But if we look at the distribution of mangrove ecosystems globally and the people who inhabit those places are not necessarily the contributors to the challenge. Just in the previous session, when Dr. Ghosh was moderating, he brought up the issue of financing. When in the inaugural session, the principal secretary was speaking, he talked about financing. So here might be an opportunity to bring in money for these people who are not necessarily well off, and compensating them for not only the impacts that they are receiving, but also for being at the vanguard of protection and conservation of these systems. I will not speak much further. You already have the introductions to these speakers, very eminent, all of them. Since Professor Bhadury is in the US, and I'm sorry that we have to pull you out at this time, I will request him to go first. Dr. Senaratne is also at a time zone which is not ours and maybe not as comfortable as ours. So Dr. Senaratne will go next. And I requested Professor Das to go last, and she's very graciously agreed to that. I will stop here. Professor Bhadury, if you will go now, since there are 3 speakers and we have out an hour, so up to 12 minutes so that we still have time. Over to you, Professor Bhadury. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Danda. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I will just share the screen very quickly. I hope you can see the slide show mode of the presentation. Great. Thank you so much, and I would like to thank ORF for the invitation. It's great to be among the distinguished sets of panelists, and especially being moderated by Dr. Danda, whom I know for a long period of time. So I'm going to highlight a couple of points on the mangroves and blue carbon. And I start by saying that blue carbon, according to me, is the sustainable management of the blue ecosystems. So it's not merely how much carbon is stored below ground or how much carbon is stored above the ground. How good we manage these ecosystems are going to be very crucial for climate mitigation and ultimately kind of reducing the way we have turned our globe upside down, to be very honest with you. So there's a strong interplay between blue carbon and blue economy. If we look at some of the data sets, for example, in the East Asian seas, the estimated value of blue carbon is around 111 billion US dollars. And you see there's a continuous interaction with the blue carbon components, with the biology, and then with the bioresources. So there's a strong interplay of that, which means if the blue carbon flow gets disturbed, that would have implications, long-term implications on the blue economy. When I talk about blue carbon, I specifically want to highlight 3 particular ecosystems: the mangroves, salt marshes, and seagrass meadows. And these ecosystems store more than 30 gigatons of carbon. So you can clearly understand the importance of these ecosystems. And I'm going to highlight only about the mangroves very quickly. So why do we really care about them? I think this graph really shows the reason for it. You see, for estuarine and oceanic mangroves, the amount of carbon that is being stored is far higher compared to many other ecosystems. So they, per unit area, store more amount of carbon below the ground, and that is something which is extremely important if we are to tackle the CO2 and the mitigation of the CO2, particularly ocean acidification scenarios in the long term. If we very carefully see that the global extent of these ecosystems, so well, I mean, they are very widely distributed. At least one blue carbon ecosystem is present in across 151 countries, and 71 countries have all the three ecosystems. So I think we are also very blessed, India and actually the South Asia as a region, that these three ecosystems are there, and therefore these are intense repositories for I would say navigating the blue carbon and tackling the climate issues that we are talking about. There are different estimates of the blue carbon in global mangroves, and we kind of tend to agree or disagree. But these estimates kind of variable because in some regions more data has been collected and some region data are sparse. So nevertheless, these estimates have been put forward that the carbon accumulation rate, in the surface carbon accumulation rate versus the net ecosystem production and the below carbon stock, there is region-wise variability is there, and that partly because could be the complexity of the interaction between the mangrove vegetation and the other biota that play a very, very important role in addition to physical and chemical gradients of the coastal ocean. If we look at the blue carbon from the Indian perspective, I think the studies are very limited, and what I mean by that is the empirical measurements of blue carbon are limited. Nevertheless, blue carbon ecosystems of India estimated to have a collective carbon stock about 67 teragrams of carbon, and the green payments have been estimated to be around 9.6 billion US dollars. But the big issue is that there are lack of robust on-ground data for better estimation of blue carbon. I wanted to highlight in the Sundarbans, if you look at it, these values are really reproducible, whether it's the Indian part of the Sundarbans or the Bangladesh part of the Sundarbans. So I quickly go to again the Sundarbans. Despite the issues of the Farakka, I think we have a decreased freshwater flow, no doubt about it. But there is high suspended particulate matter that is flowing through the system, and these suspended particulate matter play a very, very important role, and that actually also is part of the conundrum of the bigger picture of blue carbon when we are talking about. So to be able to estimate blue carbon in terms of the blue carbon estimation and in terms of the economy, I think time series plays a very, very important role. In the Indian part of the Sundarbans, we have the Sundarbans Biological Observatory time series, that red square block you see, where we have been estimating different attributes of the carbon components in the westernmost part of the Sundarbans. And I wanted to highlight, this is typically an urban mangroves rather than the Sundarban mangroves that we can think of. But the biggest thing that I want to point out that there is huge natural variability of the geochemical gradient, and therefore estimation of blue carbon in Sundarbans could be far more challenging compared to many other mangrove ecosystems. We have been working very closely with the West Bengal Forest Department and WWF India, and we have been monitoring the below ground carbon estimation in around 250 sites within the Sundarban Biosphere Reserve. And this picture is starting to get clear, although it's very seasonal in nature. But we believe that this information is going to be very, very critical to have a holistic understanding or developing a robust platform for integrated blue carbon management plan for Sundarbans, which I have highlighted out here. I'm not going to go into it, but I wanted to say that we have just compiled some of the blue carbon data globally, so all these ecosystems, including the Sundarbans, and there are more than 67,000 points we have compiled together, and you clearly see that the blue carbon representation from South Asia, particularly empirical measurements, are rather poor. So that tells us that there's a lot more to be done in the long run. I want to give a couple of examples. Of course, West Bengal Forest Department has done a tremendous job in the mangrove plantation. But this is another example, the work of Professor Krishna Rai's group from India, where she and her team has actually converted one of these sites. You can see how it looked like a couple of years back, and after the very scientific mangrove plantation program, this mangrove cover has increased. So these have been provisionally included as an OECM site. But one of the things is that as the trees grow slowly, therefore the blue carbon estimation would also vary dramatically. Now, I come to the very quickly to the last point, the conundrums of the blue carbon estimation. We cannot just look at the blue carbon only by looking at soil or biomass. We need to integrate the biology component. The other biological components are very important. And this is particularly significant for mangroves, including Sundarbans. We need to understand the organic matter which are being captured by marine organisms. We need to better estimate the sequestration rates because the flow are very dynamic. There are intertidal mud flats, for example, in the Sundarbans with microbial mats. I think we do not know what their estimation or contribution to the blue carbon is. Last but not the least, we need to unravel the black box. So the microbiome interaction with mangrove vegetation, ultimately how it can foster greater growth of mangrove vegetation and ultimately contribute to the blue carbon. And I wanted to point out that when we look into all these factors, we need to look into the mangrove resilience index. This is something that we are collectively working upon, and that will have huge implications on the blue carbon. So I just end with some thoughts. Despite these positive things, there are some massive challenges, and we have been talking about it. Dr. Nilanjan Ghosh was saying before, there are less attractive investment than other offset types in blue carbon management in mangroves. The reason for that being is that the transaction costs are very, very high. There are major issues with the land tenure and yields are delayed because, tree growth can be variable. And that's where the science component becomes very, very critical. Integrating the other biology will be very important. The other issue is the land availability. We are talking about food security, UN SDG goals, but we have to also tackle the climate, So how do we address these? These are very challenging issues. And last but not the least, the methodologies are incredibly complex. We cannot bring the methodologies adopted in global north or developed by global north to global south. We have to look at local and regional scale methodologies. So what will work in Sundarbans may not necessarily work in Indonesia or may not necessarily work in Malaysia. And I end up with this thought. Yeah, the blue carbon is extremely critical because blue carbon will have huge implications for high-level motivations for ocean sustainability. And last but not the least, it will drive the blue upskilling. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me. I will just switch my video off to make sure that the Wi-Fi does not suddenly go off. My name is Malshini. I join you from the very beautiful island of the Seychelles, and thank you so much for having me as well. The former panelist has given an excellent overview of blue carbon, and the outlay for this presentation and session has been very well set up for me. Essentially, I will dive straight into the Seychelles, and as we are all aware, small island states such as myself and my country has been at the forefront of tackling very adverse impacts of climate change. And this comes from everything such as rising sea levels to ocean acidification, as well as, of course, changing weather patterns. And this is something that we are seeing almost on a daily basis. And to tackle this, the Seychelles launched its Blue Economy model in 2018. And this was a concept that for the country revolved around not just the sustainable use of ocean resources, but to also promote things like economic growth in tandem with social inclusion, as well as the preservation of our marine environment. Now, the Seychelles holds much more water than land to its name. So for island nations such as Seychelles, the blue economy is not just an idea, it is a way of life that is very intricately woven into the fabric of our very existence. And within the blue economy model, we have committed to protect at least 50% of our blue carbon ecosystems, of which we have seagrass and mangroves, by 2025, and 100% by 2030. This might sound quite ambitious, and I would say that yes, it is, bearing in mind that we also have to balance our conservation aims along with our development goals as well. With respect to some of the data that comes out for blue carbon ecosystems here in Seychelles, it is stated that we can capture more than 200,000 tons of organic carbon, and this is equivalent to more than 60% of the Seychelles' annual carbon dioxide emissions. Now, we have been very actively involved with international partners and coming up with agreements to try and address climate change mitigation measures, as well as look to protect our marine environments within the blue economy. We were the first country, for example, to launch the Blue Bond, and our Blue Grants Fund is a collaborative initiative. What happens is we have the Seychelles Blue Bond Program, we have the Nature Conservancy, and we have the GEF facility. And this fund supports projects that tend to enhance climate resilience, sustainable fisheries, as well as emphasizing the importance of blue carbon ecosystems. The slide I'm showing now comes from our Seychelles Conservation and Climate Adaptation Trust. It's in the short form known as SECAT. It is an innovative finance mechanism. It mobilizes resources for projects that are focused on marine as well as coastal conservation, and we have therefore been very instrumental in funding initiatives that specifically seek to target the preservation of blue carbon ecosystems. These projects, for the large part, tend to involve community engagement, scientific research, as well as practical conservation measures that ensure, for the most part, that these habitats are sustainably managed. It's very crucial at this juncture for us to recognize, and I'm sure all of the panelists have been talking about this, climate change and the impacts of climate change is not just environmental. They have very profound social and economic implications as well. And for the Seychelles coastal communities, they are particularly dependent on fishing and tourism, and therefore they tend to face increased challenges as a result of climate change because they are most affected in terms of livelihood as well as their well-being. Therefore, for projects that are related to conservation around blue carbon ecosystems, local communities have been integral to this process. Engaging and empowering coastal communities tends to ensure that conservation efforts are not just effective, but it also aligns with the needs and aspirations of the people who are most dependent on these ecosystems. The picture I have here is from a watershed community that is part of a district here on the main island of Mahe, and they have banded together in order to replant mangroves and to take care of the mangrove and wetlands that is in their very district. And I'm quite aware that today's workshop does focus on mangroves, and I will say that when it comes to blue carbon ecosystem initiatives, when it comes to conservation in Seychelles, mangroves tend to receive a lot of attention, possibly because they are the most visual of all of our blue carbon ecosystems. We have hotels, for example, that have adopted the wetlands or mangroves on or around their property for preservation and conservation purposes. And as I just mentioned, we also have committees such as these, which are community-based, that join together to restore mangrove ecosystems to reduce their vulnerability. However, I will take a little road turn, if you will, from the workshop's title, and I would like to point out that small island states also host some of the largest seagrass meadows in the world. It can be argued that perhaps they remain very poorly understood and as a result, largely mismanaged around the world. And for the Seychelles, seagrass beds account for 99% of the blue carbon extent in the Seychelles as well. And the island state is very slowly recognizing that seagrass alongside mangroves require preservation and conservation in line with the blue economy framework. And to give you a very quick example, in 2022, seagrass was finally given formal terminology in the country's native tongue, which is Seychellois Creole. Up until then, there was no word for seagrass in the Seychelles, which just goes to show you the extent to which there was no awareness of this blue carbon sink in the country. There is also no blue carbon offset market that has currently been developed. And my PhD research, as this slide hopefully shows you, it revolves around understanding how communities in Seychelles perceive the blue economy, as well as their perceptions around the role of community when it comes to the development of blue carbon offset markets, and how they feel about blue carbon sinks when it comes to mitigating climate change. And just to share with you very quickly what our research is kind of finding out, many respondents in the Seychelles are very climate conscious, which is no surprise. They are very aware of mangrove and mangrove conservation projects in the country, also not a big surprise. For now, they do not wish to participate wholly in a carbon offset market unless these markets are co-managed between government, community, NGOs, as well as the private sector, which we found to be very much in line with the research that we had done in other markets around the world. And essentially, almost all of our respondents, be it from the elite interviews from stakeholders in government, down to the community focus groups, and at a granular level in our households, felt that community participation in projects that the country would look at towards blue carbon ecosystem management and development would be extremely integral towards its success. So through innovative financing, international collaborations, community involvement, I'm hoping that my presentation has shown you that Seychelles strives very much to set a very inspiring example for sustainable environmental management of blue carbon sinks. The country is also in the process of drafting its very first blue carbon policy. However, my research very much shows us that there needs to be a lot more awareness, a lot of education and sensitization, as well as engagement with coastal communities if the country intends to further explore initiatives around blue carbon. If not, this is a quote that I came across when I was doing my literature review for my PhD, and it has stuck with me through the years. If the potential socioeconomic costs and benefits are not considered, the result is the exclusion of society from a revolution that is initiated for its very own benefit. So I will leave you with that, and thank you very much for having me once again.
Thank you very much. You're also well within time, and it was a pleasure listening to you. It was also very heartening to take note of the ambition that Seychelles has set in terms of conserving ocean carbon trapping ecosystems. So with that, and again, I will request the audience here and virtually to hold on to their questions. Over to you, Professor Das, for your work and experience sharing.
So before the sector says, thank you, Nilanjan, thank you, Ara, for inviting me. So here I'm going to talk about the ecosystem services of mangroves. I haven't done any work on carbon, so sorry for that. But I have done a number of projects on different ecosystem services, and that's what I'm just going to give an overview. I have quite a few slides. I'm going to go very quickly over that. So yeah. Okay, so these are the questions that Chair has asked me to cover in my presentation. So the first one, I'm thinking, basically the drivers of mangrove decrease. I'm going to take that from the literature, and the other two I'm going to talk about a little bit in my work and provide you the evidence. Next one. So this one is a slide that I'm taking from MAP, from their new website, where they have tried to say what exactly are the mangroves, why we should really be talking about mangroves. So these are the ecological superheroes. There are so many evidence that they do wonderful job for the people who are living nearby and also people who are living far off. So they are the wildlife hotspot, very rich in biodiversity. They are protecting the communities, and at the same time, mangroves are also under attack. So there are two set of drivers that are killing the mangroves. One are the anthropogenic ones, the shrimp aquaculture, the logging, oil tourism, urban expansions, and lot of drivers are there, already been identified. So I don't do much work on the drivers because I have been working on the ecosystem services, but this is all there in the literature. And now we are also having the additional, the natural threats because of the climate change. We have already had many talk in the morning. So they have identified how the increase in the salinity, increase in the sea level rise, increase in the extreme events. They are also working on the mangroves. Mangroves help us to adapt and also to mitigate the climate impact. And at the same time, mangroves are also under threat. So I think we really have to do that. So this is one slide where I'm just trying to say that mangrove provide us a bunch of services, ecosystem services. You talk about supporting, provisioning, regulating all cultural and mangrove. There are n number of services we are getting from the mangroves. If you compare different ecosystem services, I think the number of benefits you get from mangroves are much higher compared to many other ecosystems. Many of them have been valued, and I think if you compare many other coastal ecosystems, mangroves are the ones which are really being studied much in larger number compared to others. So I myself have worked on, okay. So I myself have worked on a few, supporting services, regulating services, and also one cultural services, which I'm going to share about you. So go back next. So just to give one overview, I have, these are all my published work, which are not work in progress. So which are published, all published in good journals. So the first of all, I worked on the super cyclone in Odisha and tried to see what roles mangrove played during that the mangroves of Bhitarkanika and also little bit of mangrove we have in the Mahanadi Delta, what roles they played during the super cyclone. So I tried to find out the impact of mangroves in reducing human life loss, loss of the livestock, and also loss of the properties. So the paper on human life loss has already been published in a couple of journals, two in Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences, one in Natural Hazard, one and two in EPW, and also one in 2-3 book chapters. So then that says mangroves reduce, they protect life during storms. Then I have one paper which was very, very interesting. I tried to compare the mangrove benefit with the kajurinas, which are also another coastal green buffer, and the governments are all planting kajurinas. Then I found out that kajurinas do not provide any storm protection. Wherever we had kajurinas, they increase the death toll. So mangrove is a native species. Kajurinas are planted, which are invasive, but kajurinas do not protect. And at the same time, I have also studied the cashews and also the palmyras. The palmyras I studied in Andhra coast during the cyclone Hudhud. So then I found out that both palmyras and also cashew, they reduce the damage to the houses. And they also increase the resilience, but wherever you have kajurinas in that area, they do not. They neither protect the houses nor do they protect the lives. That's what is the finding. Then I studied the wind protection by mangroves, which has been a very controversial topic. People say mangrove reduce the storm surge, but they don't reduce the wind. But I found out during super cyclone, mangrove did reduce the damage to the properties. So that is a paper that was published in SUFIP and Coastal Sciences, and I have 2 publications on that. Okay, next one. Okay, so then I also have done a project on Gujarat mangroves. There I studied, the natural versus planted. How do they provide the protection? So then the evidence, and these papers are all published in World Development. I think one in World Development, one as a team report by Government of India, and also one on the regional environmental change. So what these papers, they say that both natural and planted mangroves contribute significantly to both coastal and marine fisheries. So this is one study which very significantly, with a lot of evidence, I have some slides on that they provide, but the contribution of a natural mangrove is much higher than the contribution of the planted mangrove. So the proportion came out around 22%. The contribution of planted mangrove is around 22% of the contribution of the natural mangrove to coastal fishery and also marine fishery in Gujarat. Okay, and then coming to erosion, many people say if you plant mangroves, then they reduce erosion, but there was no evidence in Gujarat that mangroves plantation can reduce erosion, but they do increase deposition very, very significantly. I had many models try to estimate, special models at a very, very block level, macro level, but I did not get any evidence on that. So I just have few slides on that. So this is the slide that I take on the mangrove save lives during super cyclone. This is the areas that I studied. You can see here that is a green patch and is a red patch. The red patch are the ones where we had mangrove historically have been destroyed and people are living there. So these are called the mangrove habitat villages, and the green patch are the one where the mangroves are existing when the super cyclone came. Next. So then when I plotted the death and in the mangrove presence, you can see here that there is only one block in Odisha, the Rajkanika, which is behind the Bhitarkanika mangrove, there are no death. But rest of the areas had death both. There is a point called super cyclone landfall. So you have more death near the landfall, even there are death beyond the mangrove area, but there are no death behind the mangrove. So I try to, can you slide, click again? Yeah. So you can see here. So I have put my study, I studied some 1180 villages and put them into different categories. So just on average statistics, you can see here, the average death was around 0.4 in all the villages. But if you take villages having mangrove, villages not having mangrove, the death was very, very low for villages having mangrove, only 0.1 versus 0.5. And if you take villages in the mangrove habitat, the red patches where mangrove has been destroyed and people are living there, the most vulnerable ones. At least one death per village. Whereas if you go beyond that, it's not. Then I used this evidence, and then I started to, try to study this very, very scientifically. I had a cyclone damage function, estimated some, 2 years of work, hundreds of models, and take one, take some variables here, reduce some variables there, then, I control for the population, the wind velocity, the water velocity, the developmental factors, and then ultimately, can you go next? So I'm not, so these are the, so I'll just quickly go over. So these are the different econometric models I used. They're all there in my published papers. Go back. Yeah. So this is where you see there, the mangroves that present, they reduce the death toll by 64%, 54%, and if the historical mangroves were there, at least 92% of the deaths in those villages could have been averted. So this is a very, very strong finding. So this is the impact on the human death. So next, I try to study the wind, the effect whether mangroves provide wind protection or not. I use a special model over here. So for each villages, that 800 plus villages that I studied using the house damage data. So I try to find out where the water is coming, whether we have mangrove on the way of the water, where the wind is coming, so wind model. So very complicated special model we used, and also both econometric and simulation approach was used to find out. Next one. So what we did here, so that these are the villages I studied. For each village, I tried to measure the potential wind velocity and the potential damage without any wind break. And then I compared the potential damage to the actual damage and try to find out whether the damage is different, and if there is different, whether there is a mangrove on the way of the wind or not. So these are the circles that you see are the ways to measure the potential wind, and so this is the difference. Given the wind impact, what is the percentage of house damage in a mangrove village versus non-mangrove village? The higher the impact, the more the gap. And this paper is published in SUFIP in Coastal and Self Sciences. So all the details are given over there. So that is, conclusively, we could prove that the mangroves also provide wind protection in association with the protection from the storm surge, which is the main cause of human death. Next. So then, okay. So these are the mangroves versus Kaziranga. Can you go? There are two different areas being studied. Next one. So the result here, you can go to the next one. So the result here says that you can see here, without mangrove, the death would have been more, but without Kaziranga, the death would have been less. That says that Kaziranga really do not provide any protection, and wherever we had Kaziranga during super cyclone in Orissa, the death toll has been much higher. Next one. Then coming to planted mangroves, studied Gujarat. This is how the mangrove cover has changed in India in between during 1987 to 2011, and you can see here the maximum has been in Gujarat. So Gujarat government has been planting mangroves consistently since 1951, since the first 5-year plan, and this has been going on. Whether they survive or not survive, so earlier only the government was planting, and then now they have it in the PPP mode. Whoever is investing in Gujarat, they have to plant some hectares of mangrove. Okay, so now that is resultant that we have such high mangrove growth. Next one. So now this is how the mangrove cover has changed. Whatever they had in 1930s before independence and during 1990, they're no more of the same. But now in 2013, the cover has nearly doubled. Next one. So I try to find out how this is helping the fishery sector of the government. Next one. So to study that first, I'll try to find out where the mangroves were there. So like you can see the Kori Creek region. Historically, there were very little mangrove in the Kori Creek, but now the entire area is full of mangroves. So probably the sea level rise is also helping over here. So because these areas got under, these are the district level distribution. Next one, come to the result. Yeah. So first to come to the coastal fishery, I have two more slides. So come to the coastal fishery, you can see here, go back. So now this result tells you that the planted mangrove areas, according to the fisherman, there is no impact of the planted mangrove on the coastal, what's called that? That's called the Pagadia fishery. Pagadia fishery means the coastal fishery. But when I try to control for the pollution and did an econometric estimation in the next result, then I could find out, next slide, So I could find out that the areas where you have the planted mangrove, they also increase the fish catch of the pelagia fishermen compared to areas that have no mangrove. Here the baseline is the no mangrove area. And compared to no mangrove area, the catch is 4 times higher in the natural mangrove creek, around 3.9 times higher in the enriched plantation creek, and 0.9 or at least 1% higher in the planted mangrove. So the effect is coming out when you have the control for the pollution. Okay. Then next I tried to do this for the commercial fishery. So I took the different type of fishery because all the mangroves do not use fishery. All the type of fishes do not use mangrove as a habitat. It's only the demersal, crustaceans, and mollusks. They use the mangrove as the habitat. And you can see here, when I used the difference in different approach, and this paper is published in World Development. So I had Gujarat versus the other 3 West Coast states of India. So you can see here, the total catch is higher in Gujarat compared to the other control. Control is Karnataka, Goa, and Maharashtra. And the difference is only for demersal, crustacean, and mollusks, not for the pelagic. So that says that how the mangrove plantation in Gujarat, and here the treatment areas are the years when the mangrove cover is increased because of the plantation. So also I did many other tests. Coming to erosion. So you can see here the erosion is also increasing, deposition is also increasing, the net erosion deposition is increasing. So that means in the mangrove area also, wherever the mangroves have been planted, erosion is also happening over there. So they are not reducing erosion, there is no negative side. And then here I try to do an analysis. If the government is planting mangrove in Gujarat, what is the break-even years? They are getting these 2 benefits I control. One is the land area accretion, and then the next one is the fishery. And you can see here, just within 10 years, 10 to 15 years, the break-even is occurring. So even if they are spending, like I take the cost here for, planting 81,000 hectares of mangrove. So different ways of planting this much of mangrove. In one way you are spending 104 crores, and the other way, if you use a more expensive method, the cost is 183 crores, but very easily that isn't happening. So these are the evidences globally. Multiple studies, mangrove provide benefits. There are also estimates, meta-analysis saying that you get different type of benefits from mangrove all over. Now, in spite of all that, why the mangroves are still being destroyed? Next one. Okay, so these are the 4 pillars of conservation. So, only academics can provide you the scientific basis that mangroves are helping us out. So it's the government policy, corporate, conservationist, and the public who really has to play a role in conserving the mangroves. I think this also provides one of the answer to your question. So the next one is that, from my work, I have had tremendous academic impact. So many publications, good publications, citations, some 500 web coverage, then have given a talk globally to some people, 50 different countries of the world, but then government of Odisha doesn't listen to me, right? So next one.
And I will have to.
So this is the last one. So the government, the high academic impact doesn't necessarily lead to high policy impact. Okay, the government, you see the disaster management policy of government of Odisha, not a single mention of mangrove. So they are getting hours, but they are constructing storm shelter, they are constructing road, they are doing so many things, but that's very, very good. But they never take the complementarity between the engineering and the natural approach. So I think we really need to have a different language and a different way of conversing. I'm very here.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. And sorry for having to butt in from time to time because we are running out of time for this session. We just have 5 minutes. But I take note of the fact that when we look at it from the contribution to fisheries, coastal fisheries, and if you're looking at mangrove regeneration, then the payback period is 10 to 15 years. Because I heard when Dr. Senaratne was speaking that there was a lack of market for blue carbon offsets. Probably this is one service that will allow markets to operate. And I also took note when Professor Bhadury was speaking, the complexity of trying to assess the amount of carbon that is sequestered by the system, and it's just not the vegetative part of it. I will stop here and open the floor. If there are questions from the audience, we will take them now. Yes, sir, please.
Yeah, I'd like to thank all the resource persons for a very important discussion. So I have three questions for the three speakers. First, the question about the blue carbon analysis that Professor Bhadury raised, and the problem of estimation of blue carbon. And you mentioned about the integrating of biology into the system. So I was just wondering, if you look at the perspective of India, where are we stand in terms of measuring the blue economy, of the country, or whether there is any data bank or there is any institution that is working on the blue carbon data. So that's one question to Professor Bhadury. And I have one more question, and that is to Dr. Senaratne. I was very interested about the blue bond that you mentioned. And I think this blue bond is being brought up by the government of Seychelles. So the question is there a kind of a public-private partnership in this whole process? And what is the demand for this, blue bond in the economy? And last question to Professor Das. Nice to see you after a long time. Professor Das, so you mentioned about this casuarina and mangrove thing. Now, I'm just thinking of, that casuarina brings in a kind of economic benefit to the population, which perhaps mangrove doesn't. So does that stand somewhere in between about when we talk about the resilience of the houses and the planting of casuarina instead of the mangroves? That's it. Thank you very much.
Well, this question is for all the three panelists, whosoever feels can respond to it. With the uniform definition of the blue economy, because I recall Punyasloke started with this. Malshini is looking at it from her perspective. She has done extensive work on the blue economy. Punyasloke is also doing Saudamini primarily on the mangroves, but role of mangroves in the blue economy. Now, as far as the global south and the global north are concerned, I presume that there are distinctive delineations, the ways of looking at it. Now, when we talk about the ocean as a whole, or suppose the blue economy as a whole, we are treating this as a global common. But even then, different institutions are looking at it from different perspectives. Sustainability has been built into it by the very World Bank definition. But do we really, without a uniform definition, how do we really look at projects, and how can we really think of a financing project working or a product emerging out of this until and unless this uniformity works? Because out here we have this critical ecosystem livelihood linkage. In global north, that doesn't really exist to that extent. We are using the term, with Saudamini being an economist, you will be knowing, through the TEEB assessment, calling this entire mangroves, blue economy, or whatever, GDP of the poor, from the perspective of the ecosystem services. Now, this delineation doesn't exist in the global north. So where do you think that this convergence can happen?
I would request the same order so that we can let Punyasloke go at the earliest. Professor Bhadury, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Danda, and thank you, Dr. Ghosh, for the intervention. I think one of the attendees asked this question. Probably he had 2 points to that question, if I have understood it. One is like the blue carbon measurements. Is there a single place where you can find that data? Unfortunately for India or for South Asia, that is not there yet. But I think our first attempt of putting these 67,000 data points together is going to be the first one. We are calling is the global carbon project. So hopefully that would spearhead putting all the discrete measurements that have been going on into one place, and you can do that for India, Bangladesh, Sundarbans, mangroves as an example. The second question, that's interlinked one about the blue economy. I don't know actually, Dr. Ghosh and Dr. Danda. I think it's a conundrum. Will we able to ever find a common definition so that we can solve this? I think the priorities are very different, in north and south, as we very rightly pointed out. Even within the south, there are region-centric viewpoints are there. As Malshini was showing the example of how the blue financing is very nicely working. But in many parts of the IORA and also the Bay of Bengal region, I think there are challenges and issues are there. But I agree that we need to have some sort of region specific or at least Asia or Africa, Asia-Africa linkages needs to be done to have a commonality so that we can address this. I think I'll stop out here.
Thank you. Malshini, over to you.
Yes, so I will respond to the first question with regard to the blue bond. So it was the first bond that was launched, the first blue bond was launched by Seychelles, I believe in 2015. And it raised about $15 million from international investors. And it was primarily an international collaboration between the World Bank as well as three investors, Calvert Impact, Nuveen, and I believe Prudential Financial. Now, other stakeholders did get involved. We had a PPP, as the speaker queried. The beauty of the blue bond for Seychelles was it restructured our debt, and it combined public and private investment with the key motivation to mobilize resources that would empower local communities to sort of come up with projects that would help Seychelles transition towards a more sustainable management of the Seychelles oceans as well as products. And I myself have been a beneficiary of the proceeds from the blue bond in the Seychelles. As a resident of the Seychelles, I was able to propose a project, and this was funded by SECAT through the mechanisms that I showed in my presentation. And I was able to showcase impact for not just policy making in the country, but the impact on communities as well. It was one of those very innovative, forward-thinking kind of mechanisms that the country endeavored to implement. And since the launch, I believe there have been 6 blue bonds that have been launched by other countries around the world. The most recent one, if I'm not mistaken, would be Belize. And I'll be very happy to share more information about the blue bond. With respect to the second question, that's a very interesting one as well, Dr. Ghosh. I would have to agree with the first panelist in that it's a conundrum. The Seychelles has taken advantage, I believe, of a lack of a blue economy definition to adapt the blue economy model to its context and to try as best to make what works for its context. And I hope that we have been seen as pioneers for the blue economy agenda, but as mentioned, there is no universal definition, and I believe we've taken advantage of that to showcase best practice around the blue economy. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay,
please.
Thank you. Coming back to Khajuranas, if you see the history of Khajuranas, they were planted by Britishers in 1860s just to provide a fuel wood to the Puri temple. Because Puri temple was using a lot of fuel wood and there's no forest nearby. And Khajuranas are brought from Australia. And they are invasive, they can grow anywhere. So looking at the invasive nature, when you had the cyclone in 1972, in 74 they passed a resolution, the Disaster Management Authority of Government of India, they passed a resolution that let's plant Khajurina on the belt as a shelter belt. So that is how they're introduced as a shelter belt for protection from cyclone. But then things just go on, government makes a decision and it goes on. But during super cyclone, it was realized when the cyclone came, they were the first one to break. And they just floated like missiles, hitting whoever was coming, breaking the houses, killing people. So, and now there is a lot of consciousness and people are saying that, okay, please, let's not go for the invasive, because they are not protectors of the cyclone, or they don't protect during a disaster. But they do provide fuel wood security, and they also provide some other economic benefits. People are also making charcoal. So they are also, there are also commercial projects. The government is giving money to have Khajuranas plantation as a commercial venture. So they are doing that. But then, there are other areas where Khajuranas can be planted. So let's not confuse that Khajuranas could be shelter belt. They are not. Whereas others like Palmyras, they are the best ones. During Andhra Pradesh study, I could find that. Khajuranas mixed with cashews. They are also providing protection. Khajuranas mixed with other local trees that we had in the Puri coast. They are also trying to protect during cyclone. But Khajurina monoculture, wherever they are existing, they are providing, adding to the vulnerability during a cyclone. So that's what was the point that I tried to make it out over here. Okay. So economic benefit, yes, but then economic benefit and reducing vulnerability are two different things. Then coming to Nilanjan, I agree with my previous two speakers that like it has to be global context specifics. So if you see the global south, the dependence on the mangroves, the dependence on the blue economy, the level of vulnerability is so much different than the context you have in the north. So I think it's really better to go for a context specific definition and an approach rather than having a one theory that fulfills the entire global issues. I do agree to that. Yeah.
Just a small question, both Punyasloke and Saudamini, who have been talking about carbon sequestration. Because this concern of casuarina came up, so what is the comparative carbon sequestration capacity of mangroves vis-a-vis casuarina, if we at all intend to compare that?
Yeah.
Apart from the storm protection, the other regulating.
Yeah. Carbon haven't worked, but I don't think casuarinas have any below the ground casuarina sequestration.
No, average out things. So we should be from the perspective of creating a repository of carbon or being a global supplier of carbon, say in this particular part of the world, should we go for mangroves or should we go for?
No, we should
anything?
go for mangroves, but you cannot have mangroves everywhere. They have their habitat, so you can go for palmyras. Why nobody is talking about palmyras? Why cashews? Yeah.
A mangrove forest would store about 5 times more carbon than a casuarina forest, if not more.
Okay. Any other intervention from the panelists, Malshini, Punyasloke?
I just have a quick point to make. I think we should not compare mangrove carbon stock versus casuarina carbon stock. Yeah, they're very different, for first to begin with. And the second point is, I think carbon stock, the blue carbon stock in mangroves are at least 20 folds higher compared to casuarina. So casuarina does not even come into the picture, to be very honest with you. It has got other values, but it has also got a lot of disadvantages also. So that's one thing. And the third thing is, if we are talking about trading carbon, I think our best bet has to be in this region. Mangroves are our best bet to begin. Yeah.
Thank you. Malshini, do you have a last point to make? Thank you to my panelists for not only the enriching stuff that you have provided the audience, but also for being on time. Thank you to the audience, and I will close the session here. Thank you very much.